The stage lights glowed brightly as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his iconic roles in movies like The Matrix and John Wick, stepped onto the set of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, he carried an air of quiet confidence that made him stand out even among Hollywood's biggest stars. His entrance felt almost electric, and the audience couldn't help but cheer louder when he waved, warmly before sitting down across from Jimmy. Jimmy Fallon, ever the energetic host, greeted Keanu with his trademark grin. "Keanu, welcome back to the show," he exclaimed, leaning forward excitedly. "You're always such a legend here. We love having you." The audience clapped again, their enthusiasm undiminished. Keanu chuckled softly, nodding. "Thanks, man. It's good to be here," he replied, his deep voice carrying just enough warmth to make everyone feel at ease. The two started off with some playful banter, as is typical for late-night talk shows. Jimmy joked about Keanu's famously laid-back personality, asking if he'd ridden his motorcycle all the way to the studio. "I mean, come on, Keanu, do you ever not look cool? Even your parking ticket probably looks cooler than mine." The line earned laughter from the audience, and Keanu responded with his signature modesty. "Oh, I don't know about that," he said with a small smile. "I think my parking tickets are pretty standard." As the conversation continued, Jimmy brought up Keanu's latest projects, including his upcoming film and his work behind the scenes as a producer. They discussed how Keanu balances action-packed roles with quieter, more introspective performances. "You've done it all, dude," Jimmy remarked. "Action hero, romantic lead, philosophical thinker. It's like there's nothing you can't." "Too?" Keanu shrugged humbly. "I just try to pick stories that matter, you know? Stuff that feels real." Despite the lighthearted tone of the interview, there was an undercurrent of respect between the two men. Jimmy clearly admired Keanu, not just for his talent, but for the way he carried himself. Over the years, Keanu had become something of a cultural icon, not because of flashy behavior or scandalous headlines, but because of his genuine kindness and thoughtfulness. People often talked about how he seemed different from other celebrities, more grounded, more human, and Jimmy wanted to explore that side of him during the interview. At one point, Jimmy leaned back in his chair, pretending to study Keanu intently. "Okay, serious question," he said, raising an eyebrow for dramatic effect. "How do you stay so chill all the time? Like seriously, does anything actually rattle you?" The audience laughed, clearly entertained by the idea of trying to fluster someone as unflappable as Keanu Reeves. Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "Well," he began slowly, "I guess I've learned over time that staying calm helps me deal with whatever comes my way. Life throws curveballs, right? So you either let them knock you down, or you figure out how to keep moving forward." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that resonated with the room. For a brief moment, the mood shifted from playful to reflective. Jimmy nodded, clearly intrigued. "That's deep, man. Really deep." He paused, then added with a grin, "But hey, let's get back to the fun stuff. What's next for you? Any wild adventures planned?" Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "Not too many wild adventures, I promise. Just keeping busy with work and life." As the interview progressed, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The energy in the room was lively, the questions flowed naturally, and the audience remained fully engaged. But unbeknownst to anyone, including Jimmy, something was brewing beneath the surface. Keanu's demeanor, while still friendly and composed, hinted at a deeper current of emotion waiting to emerge. Little did the viewers know. This seemingly ordinary episode of The Tonight Show was about to take a turn that would leave a lasting impression on everyone who watched it. The atmosphere in the studio was buzzing with anticipation, as though the universe itself knew that something extraordinary was about to unfold. And as the cameras rolled on, capturing every word and gesture, no one could have guessed what Keanu Reeves was about to say, or how profoundly it would change the course of the evening. As the interview continued, Jimmy Fallon leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from playful to genuinely curious. He had a knack for sensing when someone was holding back or had more to say, and tonight he could tell Keanu Reeves was operating on a deeper level than usual. The actor's calm demeanor masked something profound, something that hinted at years of reflection. Sensing an opportunity to dig a little deeper, Jimmy decided to ask a question that felt personal, but universal enough to resonate with everyone watching. "So, Keanu," Jimmy began, his tone softening slightly, "you've been through so much in your life, losses, challenges, fame, and yet you always seem so centered. How do you stay like that? Like, how do you keep going when life gets tough?" The studio fell silent for a moment. It wasn't the kind of silence born out of awkwardness. Rather, it was the quiet anticipation of an audience leaning in, waiting for wisdom they knew would come. Keanu sat still, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His eyes flickered downward briefly before meeting Jimmy's gaze again. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made every word feel deliberate. "I think we all have pain," Keanu said slowly, choosing each syllable carefully. "Everyone carries something inside them, whether it's loss, regret, fear, or just the everyday struggles of trying to make sense of things. What matters isn't avoiding pain, it's learning how to live with it." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by Keanu's response. "That's powerful, man," he said sincerely. "But what about connection? Do you think people are really connecting these days? Or are we too caught up in our own worlds?" Keanu paused again, this time longer. His brow furrowed slightly as if he were sifting through years of observation and experience. Then, in a voice quieter, but firmer than before, he replied, "I think we forget how connected we are. We're all part of this web, you know? Every action, every word, it ripples outward. Sometimes I look around and see people hurting, struggling, and it feels like we're not doing enough to help each other." The audience stirred subtly, some nodding along while others exchanged glances. Keanu wasn't just answering Jimmy's question anymore. He was speaking directly to them, addressing something larger than the confines of the talk show stage. His words weren't polished sound bites designed to entertain. They were raw truths delivered without pretense. Jimmy tilted his head, intrigued, but also sensing the gravity of where this conversation might lead. "Helping each other sounds great. In theory," he ventured cautiously. "But sometimes it feels impossible, doesn't it? With everything happening in the world, the politics, the divisions, it's hard to know where to start." Keanu didn't hesitate. "That's exactly why we need to start small," he said earnestly. "It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the big picture, but change begins with one person reaching out to another. A smile, a kind word, even just listening. It can make a difference. And yeah, maybe it won't fix everything overnight, but it's better than doing nothing." By now, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The lighthearted banter from earlier had given way to something far more meaningful. Jimmy glanced toward the camera briefly, perhaps wondering whether he should steer the conversation back to safer territory. But instead, he found himself drawn further into Keanu's perspective. "You talk about helping others," Jimmy said, his tone tinged with both curiosity and vulnerability. "But what about taking care of yourself? You've been through so much publicly, the loss of loved ones, the media scrutiny, and yet you always seem to rise above it. Where does that strength come from?" Keanu exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. For the first time during the interview, he allowed himself to appear less guarded, more open. "Strength isn't something you find overnight," he explained. "It's built over time, piece by piece. Some days it's just about surviving, getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, taking the next step. Other days it's about remembering why you're here, why any of us are here." He paused, looking past Jimmy and directly into the camera. His piercing blue eyes seemed to lock onto every viewer at home, making them feel seen, heard, understood. "We're here to connect," he continued, "to love, to learn, to grow. But sometimes we lose sight of that. We get distracted by noise, by anger, by fear, and then—" He trailed off, his voice softening. "Then we forget to take care of each other." Jimmy froze for a split second, caught off guard by the intensity of Keanu's delivery. This wasn't just a celebrity sharing their thoughts. It was a human being bearing their soul, challenging everyone listening to reflect on their own lives. The host recovered quickly, though, his admiration for Keanu shining through. "That's beautiful, man," Jimmy said softly. "Like really beautiful." He hesitated, then added, "But let me ask you this. Do you ever worry that people aren't using their voices the way they should? That maybe we're not speaking up enough when it matters?" Keanu's expression grew somber. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees now. "All the time," he admitted. "Every day I think about how much power we all have, not just celebrities, but regular people too. Our voices matter. They shape the world around us. And sometimes I worry that we're wasting that power. We're either staying silent or saying things that don't mean anything." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jimmy blinked, momentarily unsure how to respond. The audience remained eerily quiet, their attention riveted to Keanu. It was as if the entire studio had become a sacred space, one where honesty reigned supreme. Finally, Jimmy broke the silence. "Wow," he murmured, shaking his head slightly. "You've got me thinking, man. Like really thinking." He chuckled nervously, attempting to lighten the mood. "Maybe we should switch gears for a sec, huh? Talk about something lighter?" But Keanu didn't laugh. Instead, he looked straight into Jimmy's eyes and said quietly, "No, Jimmy, sometimes we need to stop and listen. Really listen." The statement hit like a thunderclap. There was no mistaking its significance, not just for Jimmy, but for everyone tuning in. In that moment, Keanu Reeves wasn't just a guest on a late-night talk show. He was a messenger, urging humanity to pause, reflect, and reconnect. And as the seconds ticked by, it became clear that this interview was about to take a turn none of them could have anticipated. For a moment, the entire studio seemed to freeze. Jimmy Fallon sat across from Keanu Reeves, visibly stunned by his guest's unflinching honesty. The playful energy that had defined the first half of the interview was gone, replaced by something far more profound and raw. Keanu's piercing gaze never wavered, even as Jimmy struggled to process what he'd just heard. "No, Jimmy," Keanu repeated softly, his voice steady, but laced with conviction. "Sometimes we need to stop and listen, really listen." Jimmy blinked rapidly, his mind racing. This wasn't how interviews were supposed to go. Late-night talk shows were meant to be fun, light-hearted escapes, a chance for celebrities to promote their projects while cracking jokes and entertaining millions. But here was Keanu Reeves, refusing to play along with the script. Instead, he was diving headfirst into territory most people avoided: vulnerability, responsibility, and the weight of human connection. The audience, too, was spellbound. There were no cheers or applause now, just an eerie stillness broken only by the faint hum of the stage lights above. Every person in the room felt it. This was no longer entertainment. It was something deeper, something real. Jimmy cleared, his throat trying to regain his footing. "Okay," he said slowly, his tone shifting from nervous laughter to genuine curiosity. "So let me ask you this. If we're not listening, what should we be hearing? What's missing?" Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression thoughtful. He didn't rush to answer, instead taking a deliberate breath before speaking. When he finally did, his words carried a gravity that silenced any lingering doubts about whether this conversation mattered. "What's missing?" Keanu began, his voice measured but impassioned, "is empathy. Real empathy, not the kind that comes from liking someone's post online or sending a quick text because it feels like the right thing to do. I'm talking about truly understanding someone else's pain, their struggles, their hopes, and not just understanding it, but acting on it." He paused, letting the idea sink in. Then, almost as if he couldn't hold it back any longer, he continued. "We live in a world where so many people are hurting. People are losing loved ones, losing jobs, losing faith in the future. And yet we act like everything's fine. We scroll past bad news. We turn away from uncomfortable truths. And we tell ourselves it's not our problem. But it is our problem. It's everyone's problem." The intensity of his delivery was palpable. Keanu wasn't yelling or raising his voice. He didn't need to. His calm demeanor only amplified the power of his message, forcing everyone to confront the reality of what he was saying. Even Jimmy, who prided himself on keeping interviews upbeat, found himself nodding along, unable to argue or deflect. "Let me give you an example," Keanu said, leaning forward once again. "Think about social media. On the surface, it connects us, right? You can see what your friends are doing, share photos, stay updated. But underneath all that, it's also a place where people hide behind screens, spewing hate or judgment without thinking twice about the impact. We say things online we'd never say face to face. Why is that? Because we forget there's a real person on the other side of that screen. A person with feelings, dreams, fears." His eyes locked onto Jimmy's, then scanned the audience as if searching for agreement. "And it's not just online," he added. "It happens everywhere. In politics, in relationships, in everyday conversations. We're quick to judge, quick to dismiss, quick to move on without really listening. But if we took the time to understand each other, if we slowed down and paid attention, I think we'd find that we're not as different as we think." The silence in the studio grew heavier, almost tangible. Some members of the audience shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps reminded of moments when they themselves had failed to listen. Others nodded silently, their expressions reflecting a mix of admiration and introspection. Jimmy, sensing the weight of the moment, tried to interject with a lighter comment. "Man, you're making me rethink my whole life philosophy here." He joked weakly, attempting a smile, but Keanu didn't laugh. Instead, he responded with quiet seriousness. "That's the point, Jimmy," he said. "We should rethink our philosophies. Not just yours, but mine, theirs." He gestured toward the audience. "Everyone's. Life isn't static. We grow, we change, we adapt. And sometimes that means facing hard truths and asking tough questions. Are we being good to each other? Are we using our voices for good? Or are we just going through the motions, pretending everything's okay when it's not?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. For a brief moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every word, every glance, every subtle shift in emotion. Backstage, the producers exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to cut to a commercial break or let the conversation unfold naturally. Meanwhile, viewers at home gripped their remotes, unwilling to look away. Jimmy finally broke the tension by removing his earpiece, a rare move during a live broadcast. He set it down on the desk between them, signaling to the crew that he wasn't concerned about sticking to the usual format anymore. Turning back to Keanu, he said earnestly, "You're right, you're absolutely right. Let's talk about this." The decision sent ripples through the control room. A producer whispered urgently into her headset, "Do we cut to break?" Another shook his head firmly. "No, keep rolling. This is gold." On stage, Keanu nodded slowly, acknowledging Jimmy's willingness to embrace the moment. "Thank you," he said simply, "because these conversations matter. They remind us that we're not alone, that none of us has to carry the weight of the world by ourselves. We just have to start listening." As the two men sat there, surrounded by thousands of eyes watching intently, it became clear that this interview had transcended its original purpose. What had begun as a routine appearance on a late-night show had transformed into something extraordinary, a call to action, a plea for humanity, and a reminder that even in the brightest spotlights, truth could shine through. And while neither Keanu nor Jimmy could predict the full impact of what was unfolding, one thing was certain: their exchange would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Jimmy Fallon's decision to remove his earpiece felt like a symbolic gesture, a signal that this was no longer just another episode of The Tonight Show. It wasn't about sticking to the script or filling time slots anymore. This was real, raw, and unfiltered. The energy in the studio shifted again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. Everyone present could sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Keanu Reeves, sitting across from Jimmy, seemed unfazed by the gravity of the moment. If anything, he appeared even more composed, as though he had been waiting for an opportunity like this for a long time. His body language remained relaxed, but there was a fire in his eyes, a quiet determination to say what needed to be said. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, and looked directly into the camera. "You know," Keanu began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion, "there are things happening right now, in this country, in this world, that scare me, things I can't ignore. People are suffering and we're not doing enough to help them." The audience, which had been holding its collective breath, stirred slightly. Some people nodded in agreement, while others exchanged glances, processing the weight of his words. Jimmy, still without his earpiece, sat up straighter, clearly moved by Keanu's candor. "What scares you the most?" he asked gently, his tone stripped of any pretense. Keanu hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice carried a depth of feeling that resonated throughout the studio. "I think what scares me the most is how disconnected we've become. Not just from each other, but from ourselves. We're so caught up in distractions, phones, social media, work, politics, that we forget to check in with our own hearts. And when we lose touch with who we are, it becomes easier to turn away from others who need us." He paused, letting the idea settle over the room. Then, almost as if unable to hold back, he continued, "Take homelessness, for example. You walk down the street, see someone sitting on the sidewalk asking for help, and what do most people do? They look away. They pretend not to notice. Why? Because it's easier than facing the truth. That person could be anyone, a neighbor, a friend, a family member. But instead of seeing them as human beings, we reduce them to problems we don't want to deal with." His words struck a chord, both in the studio and among the millions watching at home. Social media feeds began lighting up with reactions. As viewers shared clips of the interview in real time, comments poured in, "This is exactly what we needed to hear. Keanu is speaking the truth. Why doesn't everyone talk like this?" Back on stage, Jimmy listened intently, his usual playful demeanor replaced by genuine curiosity and concern. "That's heavy stuff, man," he admitted, shaking his head slightly. "It's like, we know these issues exist, but we convince ourselves they're too big to tackle. Like, where do you even start?" Keanu smiled faintly, appreciating the sincerity behind Jimmy's question. "You start small," he replied simply. "You start with one person, one act of kindness. Maybe it's buying a meal for someone in need. Maybe it's volunteering at a shelter. Or maybe it's just sitting down and listening to someone who feels invisible. Those small actions, they add up, they create ripples." The analogy resonated deeply with the audience. Several people nodded approvingly, some even whispering to their neighbors in agreement. Jimmy, too, seemed inspired by Keanu's perspective. "So it's about taking responsibility," he summarized. "Not waiting for someone else to fix things, but stepping up yourself." "Exactly," Keanu affirmed. "Responsibility isn't just about solving problems. It's about acknowledging them. Admitting that yes, the world is messy and yes, life is hard, but that doesn't mean we give up. It means we keep going. We find ways to make things better even if it's just a little bit at a time." As the conversation unfolded, Keanu opened up further, sharing personal stories that illustrated his points. He talked about moments in his own life when he'd felt lost or overwhelmed, and how acts of kindness from strangers had helped him regain hope. "There was a time," he recalled, his voice tinged with nostalgia, "when I was going through a really tough period. I stopped at a gas station late one night and the cashier, an older woman, must have seen something in my face. She handed me a cup of coffee and said, 'Everything will be okay.' That simple gesture meant more to me than she'll ever know." The story touched everyone in the room, including Jimmy, whose eyes glistened slightly as he absorbed Keanu's words. "That's incredible," he murmured. "People underestimate the power of small gestures, don't they?" "They do," Keanu agreed. "But those gestures, they're everything. They remind us that we're not alone, that someone out there cares, and sometimes that's all it takes to get someone through the day." By now, the atmosphere in the studio had transformed completely. What had started as a typical late-night interview had evolved into a heartfelt dialogue about compassion, connection, and humanity. The audience, initially there for laughs and entertainment, found themselves reflecting on their own lives and choices. Many wiped away tears, while others clutched their hands together tightly, absorbing every word. Even the production team backstage was affected. Normally focused on timing cues and commercial breaks, they now stood transfixed, watching monitors and whispering amongst themselves. One producer whispered, "We might never get another moment like this, let it play out." As the segment neared its natural conclusion, Jimmy turned to Keanu with visible gratitude. "Thank you," he said earnestly, "for saying what needed to be said, for reminding us that we have the power to make a difference, if we choose to use it." Keanu smiled warmly, his expression softening. "Thank you for letting me say it," he replied. "And thank you for listening." The applause that followed was unlike anything heard earlier that evening. It wasn't the polite clapping of fans amused by clever jokes. It was a standing ovation fueled by admiration, respect, and a renewed sense of purpose. People cheered not just for Keanu Reeves, the actor, but for Keanu Reeves, the human being who dared to speak truth to power and to heart. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, the ripple effects of the interview were already spreading, far beyond the confines of the studio. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions. Hashtags related to Keanu's message trended worldwide, and news outlets scrambled to cover the unexpected turn of events. For many viewers, this wasn't just a memorable TV moment. It was a wake-up call, urging them to reconnect with their humanity and take action in whatever way they could. And as Keanu stood up from his chair, shaking Jimmy's hand with a quiet smile, it was clear that neither of them would ever forget what had transpired that night. The moment the cameras cut to commercial, the studio erupted into a flurry of activity. Backstage crew members exchanged astonished glances, some whispering excitedly about what had just unfolded while others scrambled to adjust the show's schedule. Normally, late-night talk shows operated like well-oiled machines, timed to perfection, with every segment carefully planned and executed. But tonight was different. Tonight, Keanu Reeves had turned The Tonight Show into something far greater than entertainment, a platform for reflection, connection, and change. As the audience buzzed with excitement, many people stayed on their feet, unwilling to sit back down after the standing ovation they'd given Keanu. Some wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the depth of his words, while others leaned over to share their thoughts with neighbors. "Did that really just happen?" one woman murmured to her friend, clutching her chest as if trying to steady her racing heart. Her friend nodded, equally overwhelmed. "I've never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, backstage, Keanu stood quietly in the wings, sipping a bottle of water. Despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling around him, he appeared calm and grounded, almost as though he'd expected this reaction. A stagehand approached cautiously, clearly starstruck, but also eager to express gratitude. "Mr. Reeves," the young man stammered, That was incredible. Thank you for saying all of that." Keanu smiled warmly, his expression open and kind. "Thank you for listening," he replied simply. The stagehand beamed, walking away with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a small interaction, but it underscored the ripple effect Keanu's words were already creating, not just among millions of viewers at home, but right there in the studio. Back on stage, Jimmy Fallon took a few moments to collect himself before returning to host duties. As the commercials ended and the cameras rolled again, he addressed the audience directly, his voice tinged with awe. "Folks, I don't think I need to tell you how special that was," he said, looking out at the sea of faces still glowing with emotion. "We didn't plan for any of that to happen, it just did. And honestly, I'm so glad it did." The crowd erupted into applause once more, their enthusiasm undiminished. Jimmy chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "You know, when we book guests for the show, we always hope they'll bring something unique to the table. But tonight..." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Tonight went beyond anything I could have imagined." Turning toward Keanu, who had returned to his seat, Jimmy added sincerely, "I want to thank you again, man, for being honest, for being brave, and for reminding us all of what truly matters." Keanu nodded modestly, his trademark humility shining through. "It's not about me," he said quietly. "It's about all of us. About finding ways to connect and make things better." With that, Jimmy segued into the final segment of the show, a musical performance by a popular artist. But even the upbeat song couldn't fully erase the lingering impact of Keanu's message. Throughout the performance, snippets of his earlier words played in the minds of the audience members. People sang along half-heartedly, their thoughts still anchored in the profound conversation they'd witnessed. When the credits finally rolled and the live broadcast came to an end, the energy in the studio remained charged. Audience members lingered in their seats, reluctant to leave, while others gathered near the stage hoping to catch another glimpse of Keanu. Social media feeds continued to explode with reactions as clips from the interview spread like wildfire across platforms. Memes, quotes, and heartfelt posts flooded timelines, each one amplifying Keanu's call for empathy and action. News outlets quickly picked up on the story, analyzing the significance of Keanu's unscripted remarks. Headlines ranged from "Keanu Reeves shuts down late-night talk show with powerful speech" to "The moment Hollywood got real, Keanu's wake-up call." Journalists praised his authenticity, noting how rare it was for a celebrity to use such a high-profile platform to address societal issues without fear of backlash. Even critics who typically dismissed celebrity activism admitted that Keanu's words carried undeniable sincerity. Celebrities weighed in too, sharing their own reflections on the interview. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson tweeted, "Keanu reminded us all why we fell in love with him in the first place. Class act, true leader." Emma Watson posted a screenshot of one of Keanu's quotes, captioning it, "This is the reminder we all needed." Meanwhile, fans flooded online forums and comment sections, recounting personal stories of how Keanu's message inspired them to reflect on their lives and relationships. For Jimmy Fallon, the experience marked a turning point in how he approached interviews moving forward. In subsequent episodes of The Tonight Show, he began prioritizing deeper, more meaningful conversations over purely comedic banter. While he maintained the show's signature humor, he also made space for discussions about mental health, social justice, and human connection. During one monologue, he admitted, "After that night with Keanu, I realized we have a responsibility to use our platforms wisely, to not just entertain, but to inspire." As for Keanu, he returned to his private life with characteristic humility. There were no grand announcements or follow-up interviews. Instead, he focused on continuing the work he'd always done quietly behind the scenes. Whether it was supporting charitable causes, mentoring aspiring filmmakers, or simply offering kindness to strangers, Keanu embodied the values he'd spoken about on national television. His actions reinforced the belief that true leadership isn't about seeking attention, it's about leading by example. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the interview continued to grow. Schools incorporated Keanu's speech into classroom discussions about empathy and civic responsibility. Community organizations used his words to rally volunteers and raise awareness about local issues. Even corporations took note, with several CEOs citing his message as inspiration for implementing more compassionate workplace policies. One particularly touching outcome emerged when a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating homelessness launched a campaign titled "Start Small, Act Big," inspired by Keanu's advice. The initiative encouraged people to perform small acts of kindness, donating socks, volunteering at shelters, or simply striking up conversations with those experiencing homelessness, and share their efforts on social media using a designated hashtag. Within days, thousands of participants joined the movement, proving that even the simplest gestures could spark widespread change. Despite the global impact of his words, Keanu remained unfazed by the attention. When asked about the aftermath of the interview during a rare press appearance, he shrugged modestly. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted. "All I did was say what I believe. If it resonated with people, that's wonderful, but the real work happens afterward." It's up to everyone else to take those ideas and turn them into action. His perspective served as a gentle reminder that inspiration alone wasn't enough. It required effort, commitment, and courage to create lasting change. And though Keanu may have been the catalyst for this particular moment, it was clear that the power to shape the future lay in the hands of every individual who had listened. By the time the dust settled, one thing was certain. Keanu Reeves's appearance on The Tonight Show would go down in history not just as a memorable TV moment, but as a testament to the enduring power of authenticity, vulnerability, and truth. In a world often dominated by noise and distraction, his words had cut through the chaos, urging humanity to pause, listen, and reconnect with each other and with themselves. Months passed since that unforgettable night on The Tonight Show, but the echoes of Keanu Reeves's words continued to reverberate across the globe. What had started as an unscripted moment during a late-night interview blossomed into something far greater, a movement, a mindset, and for many, a renewed sense of purpose. The impact wasn't confined to headlines or social media trends. It seeped into everyday lives, quietly shaping how people interacted with one another and viewed their roles in the world. For Jimmy Fallon, the experience left an indelible mark on both his personal outlook and professional approach. He began hosting episodes with a newfound intentionality, blending humor with heartfelt conversations that encouraged guests to share their authentic selves. Whether he was chatting with musicians, actors, or activists, Jimmy made it a point to ask questions that went beyond surface-level topics. "I used to think my job was just to entertain," he admitted during one episode. "But now I realize it's also about creating space for meaningful dialogue, for stories that remind us we're all human." This shift didn't go unnoticed by audiences who praised Jimmy for using his platform to spark important discussions. Viewers tuned in not only for laughs but also for moments of connection and insight, knowing they might walk away inspired or challenged to reflect on their own lives. In interviews, Jimmy credited Keanu's courage for inspiring this change. "That night changed everything for me," he said candidly. "It reminded me that even in entertainment, we have a responsibility to use our voices wisely, to say things that matter." As for Keanu, life returned to its usual rhythm after the whirlwind of attention faded. True to form, he avoided the spotlight, choosing instead to focus on the quiet, steady work that defined him. He spent time mentoring young filmmakers, advocating for mental health awareness and supporting causes close to his heart, such as children's hospitals and cancer research. When fans approached him in public expressing gratitude for his message, he responded with characteristic humility. "It's not about me," he'd say with a warm smile. "It's about what you do next." Yet despite his low profile, Keanu's influence grew exponentially. Clips from the interview resurfaced repeatedly, often shared by educators, community leaders, and organizations seeking to inspire action. Teachers played excerpts in classrooms to teach students about empathy and civic responsibility. Nonprofits incorporated his quotes into fundraising campaigns, urging donors to start small and make a difference in their communities. Even corporations adopted his philosophy, encouraging employees to prioritize kindness and collaboration in the workplace. One particularly poignant example emerged when a group of college students launched a project called Listen First, inspired by Keanu's emphasis on truly hearing others. The initiative focused on fostering deeper connections through active listening, whether in friendships, families, or broader societal contexts. Participants were encouraged to set aside distractions, phones, judgments, preconceived notions, and engage in open, honest conversations. Within months, Listen First chapters sprouted up at universities worldwide, drawing thousands of members eager to practice compassion in action. The ripple effects extended far beyond organized efforts, however. Countless individuals reported making subtle yet significant changes in their daily lives. A mother in Texas shared how she started volunteering at a local food bank after hearing Keanu talk about taking responsibility for helping those in need. A teenager in Canada wrote online about reaching out to a classmate who seemed lonely, inspired by Keanu's reminder that small gestures could mean the world. A man in London recounted striking up a conversation with a homeless stranger, realizing for the first time that behind every statistic was a person with hopes, fears, and dreams. These stories, though seemingly small, painted a larger picture of collective progress. They demonstrated that change doesn't always come in grand gestures or sweeping reforms. It often begins with tiny acts of kindness, multiplied by millions of willing hearts. And while Keanu may not have been directly involved in these efforts, his message served as the spark that ignited them. Years later, when reflecting on the legacy of that fateful interview, cultural commentators noted its lasting significance. Keanu Reeves didn't just deliver a speech that night, one journalist wrote. He reminded us of our shared humanity at a time when division and disconnection threatened to overshadow it. His words weren't revolutionary. They were simple truths. But sometimes simplicity is the most powerful force of all. Even celebrities who had once dismissed activism as performative found themselves inspired to take action. Actors began using their platforms to amplify underrepresented voices. Musicians partnered with charities to address pressing issues like climate change and inequality. Athletes spoke out against injustice, refusing to stay silent despite potential backlash. Slowly but surely, a culture of accountability and compassion began to emerge, one where fame wasn't just about accolades but about impact. For Keanu himself, the aftermath reinforced his belief in the power of authenticity. Despite the praise and recognition, he remained steadfastly grounded, prioritizing substance over spectacle. Friends and colleagues described him as unchanged by the experience, still riding his motorcycle around Los Angeles, still stopping to chat with strangers, still living life with the same quiet grace that had endeared him to millions. When asked about the long-term effects of the interview during a rare appearance years later, Keanu offered a simple response. "If anything I said helped someone see the world or themselves a little differently, then it was worth it. But the real heroes are the ones doing the work every day. They're the ones making the world better." His humility only deepened the admiration people felt for him. Fans didn't love Keanu because he was perfect. They loved him because he was real. Because he reminded them that even in a chaotic, complicated world, there was beauty in vulnerability, strength in kindness, and hope in connection. In the end, the story of Keanu's appearance on The Tonight Show became more than just a tale of an extraordinary moment. It became a testament to the enduring power of truth. It proved that when someone speaks from the heart, without fear or pretense, they can touch lives in ways they may never fully understand. And it showed that even in the brightest spotlights, the simplest messages can shine the brightest. So while the cameras eventually stopped rolling and the applause faded into memory, the essence of that night lived on, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in homes, and in hearts. Keanu Reeves hadn't just stopped a live show. He'd reignited a conversation about what it means to be human. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that the smallest voice can start the biggest wave.